Welcome everybody to the MCBK 2021 Town Hall. I'm Chuck Friedman. I'm chair of the Learning Health Sciences Department at the University of Michigan and co-chair of MCBK in its current incarnation. And the goal of this meeting is to figure out together what the next incarnation of MCBK is going to be. And to that end, we have put together the agenda you see on the screen. I will give a very brief introduction, which I'm in the process of doing. And when I am finished, I will turn the floor over to our good friend and colleague, Peter Emby, who will provide a perspective of someone familiar with MCBK and an active participant on the steering committee, but someone who has been, call it one level removed, and can speak from the perspective of the leader of an entity who might become part of MCBK in its new form. I think everybody knows that we are contemplating transforming MCBK into a membership organization. And the overriding agenda item for this meeting is to consider the future of MCBK as a membership organization. And Peter's remarks will set the stage for that consideration. After Peter is finished, Rachel Richardson, the other co-chair of MCBK, will talk about some of the activities a membership version of MCBK might pursue. And following that, I will briefly talk about what the organizational home, or at least the initial organizational home of MCBK might be as a membership organization. And then Doug Van Houweling will introduce some choices we have to make regarding how we organize. And this should leave ample opportunity for your voices and opinions and senses of how we might proceed to be placed into consideration before the whole group. So that's our plan for today. We're hoping for an extremely interactive meeting. If you wish to participate, to have your voice heard, I think the best thing to do is to raise your hand and we will recognize you. We'd like to hear people's voices. I guess you could also put your comments in the chat, but I think we would like people to speak out into the whole meeting. So please feel free to raise your hand, and whoever has the floor at that time will recognize you for your remarks. So without further ado, let me thank Peter for taking time from his busy schedule to join us today. As I think everybody knows, Peter is in the process of transitioning from being the president and CEO of the Reagan Street Institute to becoming chair of the Department of Biomedical Informatics, along with several other roles at Vanderbilt University. So Peter, perhaps you could speak from both perspectives as you talk about the future of MCBK as you see it. And thanks again for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chuck. Thank you for having me. And it really is a pleasure to be here. So as Chuck alluded to, we had a chance to talk a little bit about this, and I love the invocation concept. I'll try to be priestly here. First of all, I'll just start by saying I feel very privileged to have been a part of this community on the steering team from the beginning. Even though, as Chuck says, I've been a bit more removed, having seen the evolution of the MCBK vision over the last few years has really been remarkable. And, right from the get-go, I think all of us who are engaged in this, and I'm sure I literally preaching to the choir here, we are all bought into the notion, but it becomes more and more evident to me over time as we see the kinds of activities that we're all engaged in, and the opportunities that are coming, and the need of what's happening in the health community, certainly with much sharper relief because of what we're seeing during the pandemic, how really, really important it is to not only be focused on what we need to be doing around data mobilization, but really on knowledge mobilization. And that is a unique and important distinction. And while we have done an incredible amount of work, I think, as a community already in a relatively short order, thanks to the efforts of all of you, there's a lot of work that remains. And I think this evolution of the MCBK vision to formation of a formal organizational structure just makes a lot of sense to me. And I think it was very prudent and appropriate not to jump right to that from the get-go, but it feels like the right time to me. And as I was talking about with Chuck ahead of this, from the perspective of the president and CEO of the Regan Street Institute, and then soon to be the chair and senior vice president at Vanderbilt, the idea of joining a group like this as an organization is something that also just makes a lot of strategic sense to me. Because we, for instance, here at the Regan Street Institute have been very focused on the kinds of work that we need to be doing to advance the vision and operationalize the learning health system, and the advances of how it is we can develop and deploy actionable and equitable artificial intelligence-based solutions and algorithms, and be able to monitor those, and traffic and knowledge. All of that, I can't tell you the number of times I come back to the concepts and vision of MCBK. And so I'll say now, and we'll talk more about this as the meeting goes on, and as you'll see later in the session, the idea that we will have an organizational structure that includes organizational members and individual members. I'll just say I'm committed to being one of the first members, not only personally, but also on behalf of the Regan Street Institute before my departure here later this year. And I remain committed to that. And so in short, I'll end by saying that I couldn't be more excited about the next steps for this community and the work that we're doing in MCBK. I think we're all going to look back on this day as a momentous one, where we took this next step to establish an organization that we're going to be founders of here, and be able to move this forward. So full steam ahead. Now back to you, Chuck.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate your remarks and your support. And now, without further ado, let's move ahead with the agenda. And I think Rachel will take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter, for those remarks and for your support and engagement for all these past years. And thanks everyone else for joining. It's great to see the support and interest here in how we can move forward to develop this idea in this community around mobilizing CBK. As many of you know, I recognize most everybody here from participating in our meetings. We largely targeted this webinar event, this town hall, to folks that have been participating, that are already familiar with CBK and MCBK. Everyone is welcome, of course, but I won't go into too much background, but I will say that the components of the vision that are shown here are pulled from our manifesto, which is actually on the webpage, which gives a little more elaboration on this, but really just defines this, what pulled us together as a community is this idea and our shared interest to make computable biomedical knowledge, or CBK, very broadly defined, accessible, implementable, and actionable to improve health. We've had 4 public meetings already. It's hard to imagine that. 2 face-to-face meetings starting in 2018 at National Library of Medicine and then NIH. And then our last 2 meetings have been virtual. We've got 3 really terrific working groups, Standards and Technical Infrastructure, which is a newly merged group, actually, looking at the metadata aspects and the infrastructure requirements to be able to consume and manage computable biomedical knowledge safely. The Policy and Trust Working Group is focusing on largely the trust issues and really moving us toward being able to quantify and report and share and measure these features of trust that will enable potential knowledge users to be able to assess the history and the quality of these computable artifacts. And finally, the Sustainability and Inclusion Group is working with a number of different stakeholders and keeping a list, trying to identify who are the stakeholders in this ecosystem that we envision. And there are many that aren't in our community or active in our community yet. And the Sustainability and Inclusion Working Group is really trying to understand those stakeholders, those perspectives, and really bring in what's that value proposition for MCBK and building this ecosystem so that we can apply CBK in the ways that Peter mentioned in his earlier comments. But with all that said, even with the great work of our volunteers and the vision and activity of these 4 working groups, there's still so much to do. We really still don't have a way through metadata to even represent computable biomedical knowledge, much less the provenance and the quality of those. There's no standard approach for representing the scientific rationale or the underlying evidence, much less the mechanics of many of these tools. And that makes it really challenging for people that want to implement this knowledge, for individuals and systems, and to really identify how this can be applied across all kinds of different social systems, information systems, platforms. There's just such a diversity of receivers out there. And so there are many challenges related to that we haven't even begun to address. Clearly, the real and potential dangers of deploying CBK at large scale are increasingly being recognized and appreciated, but it's not immediately clear how to fix this complex or serious issue. We know it's more than just a checklist or something that an individual knowledge developer or creator can implement, but rather we need a way to be transparent about how these different algorithms and knowledge sources were developed, how they were validated, and really what the experience is of them as they are implemented and brought out into the world. So we really need an ecosystem that can help us see how CBK is being deployed and what the impacts are. And I know we're all here, that's why we're here today. We have that vision. And I think a lot of people are watching MCBK, waiting for us to move towards that next step. And there are so many different ways to go about this that I think the time is appropriate for us to really start to hone in on what we can do and then what kind of organizational structure that we need to do. Michelle, if you'll just move forward one slide. At our last public meeting in July, which was virtual, we still had a great turnout. We proposed some goals for MCBK and then some underlying strategies that would be possible activities to just make this more concrete about what we as an entity might do. So the first goal, if you'll move to the next slide, convening and organizing a community. Many of these activities are already underway throughout, at least in some part, across our different work groups. But these are things we could do at a much larger scale in a much more deliberate nature if we had the coordination and a governance structure to move forward. We can connect and coordinate different CBK stakeholders and experts. We can coordinate the knowledge creators, the users, and the disseminators. We can assemble working groups and task forces, even beyond the 3 that we have, to address the technical, education, and policy-related challenges of these, and share real-life applications and create and advocate for strategies and pipelines to publish and disseminate computable biomedical knowledge at scale. It's always a mouthful. And then collaborate with other organizations to synergize efforts. So the idea is that really these goals require things that not one organization can do. So really to enhance the collaborative nature and infrastructure of what we've started to build here over these last 4 years. And for our next goal, if you'll move ahead, setting directions for CBK, the possible activities and strategies that we could do as an organization, again, many of which are underway, are to identify keys to success of CBK with an emphasis, of course, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are tremendously important as we think about rolling out and leveraging computable biomedical knowledge at scale in ways that it can be done safely and fairly. We can identify gaps and discover opportunities to advance CBK and commission stakeholders to develop strategies and activities to achieve the goals. So again, we could get much more specific. These are the very broad kinds of activities about how we can leverage this structure in this multidisciplinary group and community that we've built here. And finally, to promote the value proposition for CBK through scholarly and other venues. There's all kinds of activity that our individual members are doing, and a fair number of publications. Certainly we saw a number and an increase of posters at our last few conferences of people that are really developing computable biomedical knowledge and thinking about how to deploy that safely and at large scale so that it can truly be applied to improve health. And if you'll advance to the next and third goal that we outlined in this topic, this proposal that we sort of unveiled in July, the idea about acting to mobilize CBK. This to me is really the exciting piece of what a dynamic and diverse community can do. We could be developing and advocating for policy around CBK to make it effective and safe and fair. We can establish standards and policies to support CBK. We can encourage investment in education, develop a workforce that's able to manage and continue to address these problems as we begin to lay them out. And we can certainly work with standards development organizations to deal with this issue of diverse data sources and systems and platforms that will be ultimately ingesting this kind of information. So there's a credible number of opportunities there for us to think about this vision and how we would interact with existing standards development organizations. And potentially we could make an inventory of CBK activity, which does not exist at that point. It's hard to know exactly what's going on in the world, and just an inventory will be a starting point to start to build an ecosystem where we can actually see what the impact of that is. And then finally, the idea of acting to mobilize CBK really is about building collaboration. And so any activities that require collaboration across different members, we could support that. And it's not clear that there's another organization or entity at this time that's really pulling together people that are broadly looking at the issues around computable biomedical knowledge and what that looks like as we want to move to make it actionable at scale and meet these parts of our vision and mission statement that are so very important to us. So with that list of sort of goals and strategy to frame us, I just want to mention again that we have become really a large and diverse community of experts. We have diverse backgrounds ranging from library and information science to informatics, bioinformatics. We've got clinician perspectives, consumer perspectives, policy, public health, a variety of disciplines and perspectives that have come together. And collectively, I think that puts us in a very strong position and perhaps a unique position to look at these kinds of issues that we know need addressing and to bring them to light and develop strategies and begin to move those strategies forward so that we can reach the vision that we've put forth in the manifesto on our webpage. So as we think about MCBK as an entity, I wanted to give you that background, and then I'll pass it over to Chuck, who could tell a little bit about the history of just the birth of this organization and where we think we might go in terms of formalizing it. So Chuck?
Oh, thank you, Rachel. I would like to, at this point, just ask if anyone has any comments or questions for Rachel and what she presented, or anyone want to elaborate on that. If so, you can raise your hand or just and be recognized, or just speak out. Okay, hearing and seeing none at the moment, I'll move on. Just to briefly, and this is just one slide, talk about the proposal for the initial organizational home for MCBK as a membership organization. I recall when Barack Obama became president, he used the term twofer as something you can do and get double benefit or two kinds of benefit from doing it. In my opinion, it may be a threefer or a fourfer if we start the MCBK as a membership organization from within the University of Michigan. This has a lot of advantages, and everything I'm going to tell you has been vetted through university administrators and university attorneys. So I think I can say with great confidence that everything I'm about to tell you is actually possible. And to the second bullet on the slide is certified possible, in the sense that there are many membership type organizations operating within the university at this time. And we've spoken to a few of the leaders of the most successful of these, including the ICPSR, which is the International Consortium for Help. Doug, somebody, social at ICSPR for social and political, what's the R?
Social and political research.
Research. Thank you. Thank you. You would think I would know that by now after 10 years at the university. Anyway, we have spoken with several of the directors of organizations like the ICSPR, which have been very successful using this model. Under this model, we would enter into a formal agreement with the university to host this organization. This would be a flexible agreement, and moreover, one that, should it make sense to do so sometime in the future, be terminated with the blessings of all concerned. So one of the ways in which this is a two-fer or a multiple fer is the fact that we can derive the benefits of being housed by the university initially, and then whenever that would make sense with the blessings of the university, move MCBK into a different status, which could be a freestanding not-for-profit, or perhaps a merger with another entity that already exists. The services the university would provide, including budgetary services, legal services, the costs averted by not having to incorporate, and others would basically allow us to get started without a significant outlay of funds that we at the moment do not have. And moreover, this would make it straightforward for the Department of Learning Health Sciences, which I chair, to continue to subsidize MCBK, not to the point that it would be able to realize the vision that Rachel just articulated without additional resources, but still with some significant resources that would be a basis and a foundation from which to grow. So I would just close this bit of a presentation with my own view that this makes a tremendous amount of sense to proceed this way. But let me stop, entertain any questions that you might have, because this in a way is the first stage of the preliminary proposal we are presenting here today at this town hall.
Well, Chuck, I'll just say, I think part of the reason why just to reinforce what you've said, that I think this is a good idea, and frankly, thank you and welcome. We have similar experience kind of hosting and sponsoring early activities within an organization, and it's actually really beneficial in terms of lowering the overhead and providing all of that additional support that you have around you, rather than trying to sort of start something externally. So just reinforcement for that approach.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions or comments about how this might work? Okay, thank you. We'll move on and get much more detailed here as we turn the floor over to Doug Van Houweling, who has been an enormously valuable resource to MCBK over the years. And Doug will be presenting some of our further plans in detail, beginning, as you see on the slide, with some specific proposals about membership. Thank you, Doug.
Okay, I'm delighted to be engaged in this effort. I've had the pleasure of setting up over my career a number of different organizations in a number of disciplinary areas. And what I've tried to do here is to pull together some of the things that I've learned in that and discussed with other folks about how we might proceed. I think it's important for me to say here that this is very much a work in progress. We're not at all certain that what I'm going to suggest here is actually the correct approach. That's why we're meeting with you today. We really want to know from you what makes sense from your perspective. And so the spirit in which I put forward the thoughts I'm going to present in the next few minutes is really the spirit of just trying to get a discussion started. You sort of need to have something specific to start from, and that's what this is all about. So in terms of membership, I want to first of all talk about organizational membership. So could we go to the next slide, please? So my experience is that to launch a new organization, it's important to create a core group of charter members who join at the beginning and who form the nucleus of building the organization from the beginning. And so I'm suggesting here that we would have organizational charter members, those who join in the first 6 months, and they would have an important role in governance, especially as we establish the organization. Second, another category is organizations that are in the higher education, research, and not-for-profit sector. These organizations are wind up playing a unique role in this type of an organization, and it's important to be able to think about them as a membership category. Then, of course, corporate members. We very much want to include corporations that want to engage in moving this vision forward. Finally, affiliate members. We've talked about the fact that we want to reach out to other organizations that have related or complementary kinds of activities that wish to be affiliated with us, and we wish to be affiliated with them. So we would do that with reciprocal membership agreements. But we don't want to just have organizational members. We also want personal members. So if you go to the next slide, here we think that it's important to have professional members, folks who are in the various professions that are involved here, and also to open the organization up to students who wish to be involved in this mission. We would include a number of personal memberships in the organizational memberships. So if I'll be talking about dues in a moment, but those organizations, organizational members would wind up with 4 professional members based on a base level of dues and 8 student members, so that organizations could not only be represented organizationally, but also designate members of their organization to be personal members at no additional cost. So let me stop on membership for a moment before I go on and talk about income sources and dues, and see whether or not any of you have reactions, thoughts about this sort of initial proposal for a membership structure?
I would just chime in that I would think about, I think very broadly about what kind of professions are professions. I would include patients and caregivers and consumers as professions in that sense. And professions can be all kinds of state representatives of all kinds of important stakeholder groups.
I think that's important, and I think that that's actually an additional category that at least I hadn't thought about in the particular way that you describe it, Josh.
Yeah, Doug, it's Blackford, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. One thought crossing my mind looking at this is to truly understand, the cart and the horse. What I mean by that is, we've had a very sustainable vision for MCBK, and a lot of people have had that vision from different sectors, if you will, but MCBK has been a focal point. But I struggle a little bit still with, truly what is the mission, goals, objectives, and product and services. And I say the latter intentionally, if you will, meaningfully, because on the one hand, I see an opportunity for an academic industrial collaboration to help define a marketplace, to make a marketplace, but that might be different than, the activities one might undertake to sustain or serve, if you will, the MCBK efforts. And I see you, understanding that distinction. I think where we are, frankly, in the industry is we still struggle. Jerry Osheroff has been very close to this. Many of you have been as well, through a variety of different efforts. But, we are moving, at the pace of regulatory innovation. And I worry that that's not the pace we need. The pace we need, we have a piece coming out in Health Affairs, hopefully. The pandemic in some ways woke this sleeping giant. Highlighted data deficiencies, transport interoperability deficiencies, and truly deficiencies that allow EHRs to integrate external tools and services. And while we have the regulatory pressure in place that is toward open APIs to be usable without special effort, they still don't address what we might want to do with EHRs like we do with our iPhones. So anyway, that's a bit of a ramble. What I did in 2008, some of you were involved, some of you will recall, the CDS Consortium set up an early version of this vision and really tasked a set of work groups, 11 work groups, that all had stuff to do. And it kind of all, fit together. And I wonder if we have the same vision possibility and operational possibility for MCBK.
I just want to react to that very quickly, Blackford. I think you're exactly right. And I think we've been held back somewhat in MCBK by not having the capacity to actually address this broader agenda, which is one of the reasons that we're thinking about taking this next step. Other comments?
Can I carry on just for a second, Doug? Because the point I'm trying to make, I guess, is when we look back at early W3C or other early formative entities, and I'm not familiar with the one that has been mentioned internationally, but, what did they do to help, make things happen?
Other comments? Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please.
Well, Doug,
Yes,
I just want to stay on Blackford's point for just a moment.
go for it.
And we kind of have, and it's trite and it's hackneyed to say it, a chicken and egg problem here, or a bootstrapping problem, or you see where I'm going with this. Blackford, you're advocating for, I think you're advocating for identifying a very specific set of things that MCBK needs to do, and then forming the organization in response to those, if I understand, to pursue that more focused agenda. the alternative is to lay out a broad agenda, which is clearly what we did, get what would hopefully be a critical mass of people interested in that agenda, and then let those people determine what is done first around where the perception of the more immediate needs lie. Am I understanding correctly what you were advocating?
Yes, thank you, Chuck. And yes, I think you are. Just to put another spin on it, I've seen efforts where there's been insufficient demand to actually, say, here's my problem, how can you help me solve it? And then something takes off. I think W3C had a little more of that early on, but in truth, probably started more as an academically oriented entity. So in a way, I think we've got to think about the demand function, who is actually going to be collaborating, participating for purposes either academic, and that's enough in the early phase, or for purposes that are truly commercial and industrial, that might be a second phase. But I believe, and I know many of you do too, is either here or coming shortly.
Yes, and I would just reinforce what you've both said by saying that what I'm hoping how we solve this chicken or egg problem is to create an organization that can actually engage the questions that you're raising, Blackford, and has the resources then to begin to actually carry out the efforts that would be required based on addressing those issues. I think that's sort of the middle space that we're in now.
Yep.
Further questions or comments? Okay, let me just briefly say, obviously, one of the reasons.
Oh, sorry, Doug. There's a few comments in the chat. I think Eunice has one.
Okay.
Anyone have a comment? Do you want to?
Yes. Do any of you? I see comments in the chat, and would any of you like to go ahead and say a word to share with us in the face-to-face is not quite the right word venue?
All right.
I have a question for Jerry Osheroff. Jerry, we on the ACT side, AHRQ ACTS, where you have brought this thing to a head in an admirable and commendable effort over these 3 years. And in that effort, there's talk about forming a steering committee for LHS demonstration projects and pilots and then further projects beyond that. Is that steering committee and the MCBK NIDIS, if you will, the same thing, or could it be?
I think they're at least closely related, and that's what I was trying to tee up in my notes. So what's happening for those who haven't heard about it? So for the last 3 years, ARC has funded this ARC Evidence-Based Care Transformation Support Initiative. That funding ends at the end of next month. We produced a very detailed concept demonstration for what a knowledge ecosystem grounded in MCBK could look like in order to help broadly achieve learning health systems and realization of the quintuple aim. So the icing on that, the concept demonstration is sort of the tip of the iceberg of all the ACTS work, and the pointy end of that is a proposed 3-year set of things that would happen to build on all the work that's happened in this ACTS concept demonstration to show that we could move the needle on high priority targets like pandemic response, preventive care, blood pressure control, pain management, and opioid use. Pick some really high priority targets like that care delivery organizations like the VA, like the University of Minnesota, and others are deeply focused on. So organizations, including the ones that I mentioned, are starting to fill out this template that we've created, like the acetates in school in the old days where somebody wanted to paint a picture, there was a bunch of individual acetates. So organizations are starting to say, this is what I'm going to do about this target to move the needle. And it's not just care delivery organizations like VA and Minnesota, but other organizations that would participate in what needs to be done to make the knowledge ecosystem and the learning health system happen. So the steering committee that Blackford was talking about, one of the proposed next steps is, okay, well, there needs to be a steering committee that comes together that drives these activities. Well, it's unclear right now what's going to happen in the post-ARC funding, which will basically start November 1st to keep all this rolling. We have 10 organizations that are already working to fill out that template. And I personally have committed to play the acetate layering game, to sort of do the brokering of trying to help connect the people that want to build things and the people that want to consume things, as is outlined in that. So I think, you know, when I was looking at the bullets that were on Rachel's slides, I mean, essentially every single thing that she listed is going to be critically important to the next steps of what it is that we propose here. So what all these words that I put in the chat essentially say is, so it's broader, Blackford, than just saying, well, could it be the steering committee? At the very least, I think it'd be a coordinating mechanism and an accelerant to help bring together and advance all these things that these people are doing anyway, but looking at it specifically from the MCBK perspective, which is, again, it's a key engine for everything that they want to do. So I don't know if it's that entity exactly, but it seems crystal clear to me that there are really exciting synergies to be cultivated. And this could be an initial crowd of people that help seed the launching of this organization. If they all say, yeah, we want to do this, and we need the kinds of things that, you know, Rachel had listed on that slide. So we're happy to belong.
That's exciting.
I should get it back to you.
No, that's exciting. And
Yeah.
and I think this multiple concept of affiliate membership, where we can pull in relationships with other organizations and organizational memberships, should perhaps provide the flexibility to move in some of the directions that you're suggesting, Jared.
Let's figure out how to do that.
Okay, so income sources. Obviously, to move things forward here, we're going to need to have resources beyond that that's been contributed by the department at the University of Michigan. So, of course, membership dues and conference fees are sources of membership. In cases where there are things that can only be accomplished through collaboration among our members and our affiliates, we could pursue grants on behalf of all of them. It's important that we don't compete with any of those members for grant funding and foundation funding, but there are activities that are actually the result of the whole organization's needs, and we could pursue that. And finally, of course, contributions. We've already talked about the University of Michigan's in-kind contributions and financial contributions, but there could obviously be contributions from other organizations. Any further thoughts about sources of income? I want to move on next to talk a little bit about dues.
Doug, if I can just quickly comment.
Oh, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Or Chuck or Rachel, you know, if one were to sort of take a swag at a year one funding, year two funding, year three funding, you know, it might be possible to ramp up from a relatively modest level. Is there a sense at what is year one funding, year two funding, year three, even in this abstract chicken and egg setting?
Well, I will just say that that I think that it's reasonable to expect that we might have as somewhere between 10 and 20 charter members to get us launched. And so when I talk about dues, you might think in terms of that kind of charter membership launch group, and then think about the level of dues that might be helpful to get us started. And of course, then as the membership grows, hopefully it would, then there's the possibility to expand the activity. I don't know if that's aspirational enough, Blackford, but that's sort of the way we've been thinking about this.
That is helpful, Doug. And just one follow-on thought structurally, while you think about funding and membership, you know, consideration might be given either now or by that steering committee once impaneled about, what relations might make sense for garnering additional support or membership. And I'm thinking specifically of AMIA, of course, HIMSS as well, and there are others in that camp that might be HL7, for example, sponsoring members. HL7 is deeply committed to the same ideas, sharing computable biomedical knowledge and whatnot. So anyway, I just wanted to raise that as well.
Yes, and I think one of the key questions is sort of which organizations are organizational members and which ones turn out to be affiliate members as we move forward. Let's move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about dues. I want to make sure we have a little time left for general discussion at the end. So first of all, let me say that the notion of dues is they'd be differential by membership category and organizational size. So charter member would, all the charter members would commit to a certain amount of membership dues on an annual basis, which would, as I said earlier, hopefully be enough to launch the organization. As we move beyond the charter memberships, we would set up different categories, and these are only suggestions, so that smaller higher education research not-for-profits would only pay a quarter of what a charter member initially paid. Larger organizations would pay half, and organizations of considerable size would pay the same amount as charter members. Let's go to the next slide. Then in corporate space, we have pretty much the same thing, that corporations that have small budgets would have a relatively modest membership dues. Those that have that are really engaged in getting going would pay more. And finally, really large organizations, we'd ask to actually subsidize the organization even beyond that, which charter members had paid. Finally, personal members, the professional members, and I think it's important to go back to think about where our consumer and so on members might fit, Josh, because they're not in this system yet. But professional members would be asked to pay $100 to be a professional member. Students, $25. The notion here is that if you come to the meeting, basically this takes care of your meeting registration as well. So that's the notion we have about dues. And as I say, I've made all of these numbers essentially scaled to what we would initially ask our charter members to contribute. And I think that will determine the level of effort that we can sustain as a startup. So I'd be interested in comments and thoughts about this structure, whether it makes sense to you, whether you think there's a better way to proceed. I see Peter's hand up.
Thank you. It's a great start. I think in principle, the relative ratios are a good way to think about it. A couple of comments. One is a little bit of a hesitation about maybe it's a little more achievable with corporate, but when you go back to the previous category and you start looking at higher ed and the like, it can get a little challenging to anchor that to budgets, because it starts to get down to a lot of questions about, well, whose budget are you talking about? Is it the particular center? Is it the institute? Is it the actual overall organization, the university, or what have you? So just something that we might want to think about there a little differently is perhaps corresponding to, the value proposition, if you will. So the number of, maybe there's, for the membership, there's a certain benefit of a certain number of people that can attend the meeting or what have you. And that's just one example. So we might want to have different ways of thinking about that in terms of head count or some other way than annual budget. The other thought was just when you talk about the very large organizations, there's membership and then there's sponsorship. And we might want to just not lose that as a possibility for, if you will, fundraising as well for supporting the activities, which, if done well, can then also defray the costs of members downstream.
Both of those suggestions are on target from my experience. Other comments?
Doug Allen was going to comment before. I don't know if his comment is still relevant.
Sorry, Alan.
Oh, that's okay. No, I was thinking about, having my experiences of volunteering at HIMSS and at the ASHP, American Society of Health System Pharmacists, and so on. And in order to do that, I needed an organization, that valued that time and the products, that were coming from those groups, so that my management, the people I reported to, were supportive of me being on a conference call, putting some time and effort into that. So I think the dues idea is important, but it's I think in this particular context, it's also very important at some level to have a commitment from the charter organizations and other organizations of engagement, that they're going to support having some experts in their organizations participate meaningfully in the various work groups and things like that.
I think that's really important, that members should commit to some sort of in-kind participation with their resources, because it's got to be a two-way street. That's a extremely important observation, I think. Yes, Blackford.
Just a couple of thoughts on the scale, the funding, if you will, Doug. Number one, there's a category of folks who spend a great deal of money, but are not yet profitable. A lot of startups, perhaps, in this space, and I'm not sure how they would look at this. I know how I look at it right now. If you're saying that you have to spend 0.5 of budget's very different than revenue. So I'd encourage us to have a way of including startups that are pre-revenue, and say something about this being a non-competitive or a pre-competitive space, which is language we used in the CDS consortium very effectively. Number two, I guess, prorating everything against an X, I'm not sure that gives us the flexibility that you might want. So just another thought, maybe we can be a little more arbitrary, if you will, about levels and include the pre-revenue folks.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, well, so I finally want to, we only have a little bit of time left here, so I want to move on to the board composition. This board would actually be the startup board for the organization. But once again, like everything else here, this is, my grandkids would call this Play-Doh. We can shape it however we want. But the board should consist of three proposed members would have 3-year terms. The first 5 charter members would be on the board. There'd be representatives from each of the membership categories. We probably need at large a financial expert, and because of the fact that the University of Michigan is hosting, they will probably want to have a chair from the university. Once we go beyond 5 charter members, the charter members would elect from among themselves the 5 people who represent the charter members. So this is sort of a notion of a startup board. Again, comments, suggestions?
It sort of building on Alan's point, one other thing to think about with the board is, in addition to what value it adds internally, the value it adds externally, in the sense that as this group puts out policy statements, puts out ideas, puts out an idea for a standard, puts out an idea for something important, and we want that to carry some gravitas, being able to, because these are the kinds of folks that are members, and these are the kind of organizations or stakeholder groups or types that are prominently represented on our board, becomes very valuable. you know, it makes the paper carry some weight. It makes whatever we put out carry some more weight.
Yes, and Blackford has his hand up again.
And we just have 1 minute.
Yeah, I noticed
Sorry,
that.
I didn't put it down. My only thought is, my mistake is, you know, the requirement to have the chair be from Michigan might be worthy of some discussion.
Okay, that's useful. We'll talk with our legal folks about that. Any further comments? We need to wrap this up, unfortunately. I'm sure there's more thoughts. Okay, subsequent to this, we will send around to all of the attendees here a questionnaire, I think is the right way to put it, to get your further input on these issues, which give you a little more time to think about it and give us some direct feedback from each of you. So you should look forward to that coming to your mailbox sometime in the next few days. And then we will, of course, be back in touch to establish our next step. Okay?
Terrific. Thank you so much, Doug. I know people have commitments, so I just want to thank everyone for attending, and we will do that follow-up. And this was a great discussion. I'm sorry we were cut short, but you will hear from us again. We'll have an opportunity for future discussion.
And we have captured everything that's in the chat, including several excellent comments that were not directly responded to, but we will take very seriously.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Bye now.